This is impossible.
Billionaire
Are you
visits her
certain he
son's
was the
grave,
father?
finds a black
How can you
waitress
stand
crying
there
with
so
a child,
calmly holding his
then
child?
realizes the unthinkable. When a proud billionaire mother visited her late son's grave, she expected silence and memories, not a stranger. But there, kneeling in the rain, was a young black waitress holding a crying baby with golden curls. And when the woman whispered, "This is your son's child," the billionaire's entire world shattered in an instant. The gray clouds hung low over the quiet cemetery, and a faint drizzle misted the air, softening the edges of the marble headstones. Margaret Langford stepped out of her sleek black limousine, her driver holding an umbrella above her as she adjusted the collar of her tailored coat. The air smelled of wet earth and lilies. In her hand, she clutched a bouquet of white roses, her son Ethan's favorite, each petal pristine and flawless, like the life she had tried to build for him. She walked slowly down the narrow gravel path, her heels clicking softly, her breath visible in the chill. This was her ritual, visiting Ethan's grave every Sunday morning, bringing flowers, whispering apologies she could never say when he was alive. But as she turned the final corner toward his resting place, she stopped cold. Someone was already there. A young woman knelt beside the gravestone, her uniform damp from the rain, her head bowed low. The blue and white waitress dress clung to her shoulders, and in her trembling arms she held a small child, a baby with pale skin and soft golden curls. The woman's quiet sobs broke the silence of the graveyard, mingling with the patter of rain. Margaret's chest tightened. Her first instinct was irritation. How dare someone disturb her son's resting place? But something about the woman's posture, the way she held the child as though protecting him from the world, made Margaret pause. "Excuse me?" she said sharply, her voice cutting through the drizzle. The young woman flinched, turning toward her, her tear-streaked face full of fear and sorrow. Margaret stepped closer, her expression hard. "What are you doing here?" she demanded. Her voice trembled slightly, betraying the confusion underneath her anger. The woman didn't answer right away. She simply looked down at the baby in her arms, then back at the gravestone. The child stirred and whimpered softly. "I'm sorry," she finally whispered, her voice breaking. "I didn't mean to upset anyone. I had to come." Margaret's eyes narrowed. She glanced from the woman's uniform to the baby's face, and in that moment, she felt something stir deep within her. Something familiar? Something she couldn't yet explain. The drizzle turned to rain, but neither of them moved. The only sound between them was the rain tapping softly on stone and the quiet, uneven breath of the woman who shouldn't have been there, yet somehow seemed connected to the very person Margaret had lost. The rain fell harder now, each drop darkening the fabric of the young woman's uniform. She looked fragile standing there, her arms wrapped tightly around the baby as though he were the only thing keeping her grounded. Margaret's sharp eyes studied her every movement, the trembling lips, the red-rimmed eyes, the way she seemed too afraid to look up. "I asked you a question," Margaret said, her voice calm but cold. "Why are you here? Who gave you permission to be at my son's grave?" The woman swallowed hard, shifting her weight. "I'm sorry, ma'am," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I didn't mean any disrespect. I just needed to see him." "One last time?" Margaret frowned, confused. "See him? You didn't know my son. This is private property." At that, the young woman lifted her eyes, revealing a depth of pain that startled Margaret. "I did know him," she said quietly. "Better than most." She looked down at the baby again, brushing her thumb gently over his tiny hand. "My name is Amara. I worked at the Langford Hotel. I used to serve your son coffee every morning before his meetings." Margaret's expression hardened. "You were one of the waitresses?" she asked, her tone clipped. "And you think that gives you the right to be here?" Amara's eyes glistened. "He wasn't just my boss," she said softly. "He was kind to me. To us." Margaret's stomach twisted, though she couldn't say why. The woman's tone, the way she spoke of Ethan, it wasn't the detached reverence of an employee. It was something else. Something personal. "What do you mean, to us?" Margaret asked, her voice low, uneasy. Amara hesitated, her gaze falling to the baby again. The child had fallen asleep against her chest, his tiny fingers gripping the edge of her apron. "Because," she whispered, her voice trembling, "he's the reason this child exists." Margaret froze. Her heart seemed to stop for a moment, the sound of the rain growing distant. She blinked, unsure if she had heard correctly. What are you saying?" Amara's tears fell freely now, mixing with the rain on her cheeks. She pulled a small, worn envelope from her pocket and held it out with shaking hands. "I didn't come for money or pity," she said. "I came because he deserves to know where his father rests." Margaret didn't take the envelope right away. Her eyes darted between the woman's face and the sleeping baby. Something about that child, the faint dimple in his chin, the curve of his nose, stirred a memory she'd long buried. "I don't understand," Margaret managed to say, her voice breaking. "Are you telling me this baby is my son's child?" Amara nodded silently. The wind whispered through the gravestones, and for the first time in years, Margaret Langford, the woman who thought she had control over every detail of her world, felt her knees weaken. Amara's hands trembled as she held the small, rain-stained envelope between her fingers. The paper was soft and worn, its edges curled from being opened and closed too many times. Margaret stared at it as if it were something dangerous, something that could tear her world apart with a single word. "Go on," Amara said softly, her voice hoarse from crying. "He wrote this a week before the accident. He said he was going to tell you everything." Margaret hesitated, her fingers hovering over the envelope. The rain had eased into a mist, and for a moment, all she could hear was the steady rhythm of her heartbeat pounding in her ears. She took the letter with trembling hands and unfolded it. The familiar handwriting, her son's bold, uneven scrawl, made her throat tighten. "Mom, there's someone I need you to meet," it began. "Her name is Amara. She's not like anyone I've ever known. She reminds me to be human, to care again. I know you won't understand at first, but I love her. And I have to tell you something important. She's expecting a baby." "My baby!" The rest of the letter blurred as Margaret's vision clouded with tears. Her fingers went numb, the letter slipping slightly before she caught it again. She looked up at Amara, who stood silently, watching her with a mixture of fear and hope. "No," Margaret whispered, shaking her head slowly. "This can't be true." "He would have told me. He always told me everything." Amara's lips quivered, but she stayed calm. "He wanted to, he tried. But you were angry with him for dating someone from the staff. You told him it would ruin your reputation, that he needed to marry up. He thought you'd never accept us." Margaret felt her chest tighten painfully. She remembered that argument, how she'd raised her voice, how Ethan had stormed out of her office with tears in his eyes. It had been the last time they spoke before the crash. Her knees weakened, and she reached out to steady herself on a nearby gravestone. "I thought I was protecting him," she said in a whisper, almost to herself. "I didn't know." Amara stepped closer, still holding the child. "He loved you," she said gently. "He talked about you all the time. He said he just wanted you to be proud of him." Margaret's tears finally spilled over. Her gaze drifted to the baby in Amara's arms. The little boy stirred, blinking open wide, pale blue eyes, Ethan's eyes, staring up at her with innocent curiosity. Margaret's breath caught. The resemblance was undeniable. The same dimpled chin, the same golden curls that had once fallen over her son's forehead when he laughed. Her heart ached so deeply, it was almost unbearable. She reached out a trembling hand, her fingers brushing against the baby's tiny hand. He grasped her finger instinctively, and something inside her broke open. A flood of love, guilt, and sorrow all at once. "My God," she whispered. "He really was my son's child." Amara nodded, tears sliding down her cheeks. "His name is Ethan Jr.," she said quietly. "I named him after his father." The billionaire stood there in the misty cemetery, clutching her son's letter, her soul unraveling as the truth settled in. For the first time in years, she wasn't Margaret Langford, the powerful businesswoman. She was just a grieving mother who had lost her
drizzle,
son, leaving behind the smell of wet grass she never knew existed. Margaret stood in silence, her son's letter still trembling in her hands. The ink had begun to smudge where her tears fell, blurring the words that had already torn her heart apart. Across from her, Amara cradled the baby close, her eyes lowered, afraid to say more. Margaret turned away from her, staring at the gravestone as if it might offer answers. Why didn't he tell me? The thought echoed over and over in her mind. She had built her entire life around control, planning and appearances. But now, standing in front of her son's grave, she realized how little of him she had actually known. Her voice was small when she finally spoke. He was afraid of me. It wasn't a question. It was a confession. Amara nodded slowly. He wanted your approval more than anything, but he was scared you'd turn your back on him if you knew about us. Margaret's breath caught in her throat. Memories flooded back, her scolding him for being too sentimental, for spending time with people beneath his class. She had believed she was preparing him for the harsh world of business, not realizing she was pushing him away. He thought I'd be ashamed of him, she whispered, more to herself than to Amara. Amara looked up, her voice trembling. He wasn't ashamed of you. He loved you. He just didn't want to hurt you. Margaret let out a bitter, broken laugh. Well, I managed to hurt both of you instead, didn't I? Her fingers tightened around the crumpled letter as tears streamed freely down her face. I lost my son because of my pride, and I never even got to meet his family. The wind rustled through the trees, scattering petals from the white roses she had brought. One landed gently on the baby's cheek, and he stirred, blinking sleepily. When he opened his eyes, those same clear blue eyes, Margaret felt her chest ache all over again. She turned toward Amara, her expression softening for the first time. How old is he? Almost 1, Amara said quietly. He was born 2 months after the accident. Margaret's lips parted, but no words came. She wanted to say she was sorry, to say something kind. But all she could do was look at the child who carried her son's face. Slowly, almost uncertainly, she reached out her hand. May I? Amara hesitated, then nodded. Carefully, she lifted the baby and placed him in Margaret's arms. The billionaire held him awkwardly at first. She hadn't held a baby since Ethan himself had been this small. But when the child nestled against her shoulder, a soft warmth spread through her chest. The baby reached up, touching her pearl earring, babbling softly. Margaret closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. You have his smile, she whispered. And his eyes. God, you even have his eyes. Amara watched in silence, her heart heavy yet strangely relieved. For the first time since Ethan's death, someone else loved this little boy because of who he was, not because of pity or obligation. Margaret took a shaky breath and looked up at the young woman standing before her. You've done a good job raising him, she said, her tone softer now, almost maternal. I can see how much you love him. Amara smiled faintly, brushing away her tears. He's all I have left of Ethan. Margaret looked back at the grave, her voice breaking. He's all I have left, too. The drizzle turned to a light mist as the two women stood together, once divided by pride and circumstance, now united by the memory of the man they had both loved. For the first time in years, Margaret felt something she hadn't felt since losing her son: hope. The morning sun crept slowly over the cemetery, melting away the last of the mist. The air was warm now, carrying the faint scent of roses and freshly cut grass. A gentle breeze stirred the leaves in the trees, making them whisper softly like distant voices of the past. Margaret Langford stood at her son's grave once more, but this time she was not alone. Amara stood beside her, dressed neatly in a cream-colored blouse, her eyes calm but tender. In her arms, little Ethan Jr. giggled as he reached toward the bouquet of white roses Margaret had brought. The mood was different today. The sadness was still there, but it had changed, softened, like a wound that had finally begun to heal. Margaret knelt down and placed the roses at the base of the gravestone. The marble gleamed in the sunlight, droplets of dew sparkling across its surface. She ran her fingers over the engraved letters of her son's name and smiled faintly. "Your favorite flowers," she whispered. "You always said they reminded you of peace." Behind her, Amara watched quietly, rocking the baby gently. Margaret turned, her eyes glistening with a mix of love and regret. "You know," she said softly, "I used to come here every week, talking to him about business, the company, the future, but never once did I say what really mattered." Amara stepped closer, her voice low and kind. "He knew you loved him. He told me once that he wanted to make you proud more than anything." Margaret smiled sadly. "And I was too proud to tell him I already was." She exhaled slowly, closing her eyes for a moment before straightening her back. When she opened them again, they were filled with a quiet strength. "But I can't change the past. I can only try to honor him now." The baby reached toward her again, babbling happily. Margaret took him gently into her arms, laughing softly through her tears. "You're so much like him," she murmured. "Even your smile. It's like looking at him all over again." Amara wiped her eyes, unable to hide her emotion. "I didn't expect you to accept us," she admitted. "After everything, I just wanted you to know he existed." Margaret looked at her with unexpected warmth. "Accept you?" she said, shaking her head lightly. "Amara, I was the one who needed forgiveness, not you. I lost my son because I couldn't see past my own pride, but you gave me a piece of him back." A tear rolled down Amara's cheek as Margaret reached out, touching her hand. "You're family now," the older woman said softly. "If Ethan were here, he'd want us to be together, not as strangers, but as the family he dreamed of." They stood there in silence, the sound of the wind and distant birds filling the air. The baby giggled again, his small hands grabbing a rose petal and waving it in the air like a flag of innocence. Margaret smiled through her tears. "See that?" she said gently. "Even he knows this is a new beginning." The three of them lingered for a while longer, basking in the quiet peace of the morning. The clouds had cleared completely now, leaving the sky bright and blue, the same shade as Ethan's eyes. Margaret whispered a final goodbye to her son, her voice soft but sure. "I lost you too soon, my darling, but through them, I'll keep your love alive." As they walked away together, Margaret holding Ethan Jr., Amara beside her, the sunlight followed them, casting long golden shadows over the path. The past was behind them now, but the future, for the first time in a long while, looked bright.